also thank you all for coming this morning, taking time out of your busy schedules to come and see some information that we hope is beneficial to you, to see what's going on in our Cape Fear River. Very importantly, like Deborah and Kemp, I'm a local, grew up in Brunswick County, and spent my childhood and went to UNCW before being banished for about 20 years to New Orleans and Houston to do some work. But we always knew we'd come back here because this is home, and this is where family is. And like Deborah, I spent a lot of time on the Cape Fear and Town Creek and knowing about this area. It's really an important area to me and to my family. We used to get herring and different things on the Cape Fear and Town Creek, which there's not as many of today. But what I'd like to do today is tell you about the lower Cape Fear and talk in particular about the estuary. One of the things that you see in these images is, Eagles Island, the Cape Fear. You can see the northeast Cape Fear as well as the Cape Fear River itself. And you can also see, what's going on today. It's changed a lot since I grew up a few years ago. And what you can see here is one of the large new Panamax ships that's in the turning basin of the Cape Fear. To accommodate these 1,200 foot plus long ships, you have to be able to have a deeper port and a wider river, which is one of the considerations and one of the concerns also that we have. There's benefits and concerns in many things that I'll be talking to you today. And just to highlight for you, this is kind of where I'm going to go with my talk. And this is really one of the best pictures I can come up with to illustrate the Cape Fear and the Northeast Cape Fear. You might notice that the Cape Fear itself is what we call a brown water stream. It starts up in the Piedmont, up near Greensboro, and draining through all that Piedmont clay and material that's taken down the Cape Fear, and that's why it looks brown. The Blackwater stream that you have there, the Northeast Cape Fear, starts in the coastal plain of the North Carolina. And what it's doing is flowing through less sediment, and it's carrying tannins from the organic material that we have in the swamp areas, as Kemp described them just a minute ago. And that gives us that tea color of water. And you can see that very easily, particularly when you have a rain event up in the Piedmont. And each one of those in that brown water, black water, these are different kinds of ecosystems. These communities that are associated with these on the land as well as in the water are very important to us. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. I actually need about 5 hours, but I'll try to summarize it in this. And so each one of these is worthy of an hour's discussion. And I actually would hope that some of you, as well as our elected representatives, would take the time to actually spend and know more about these things. Because only by knowing stuff can you make good decisions. And that's really something that we need to drive home to folks. You just can't take a 3-minute time frame in a meeting somewhere and really understand this stuff. Good. So, what is an estuary? I think that's what I should start with, right? Well, an estuary is just a partially enclosed water body where fresh water meets salt. That's the EPA definition of it. And it's where the tides meet and the currents swirl, and we get that generation of different kinds of water. And as we go down to the mouth of the Cape Fear, you'll have normal marine salinity waters of like 30 to 35 parts per thousand, where we have all those fish of the ocean then mixing in with the fish of the river as we move on upstream. And what we're going to do as we move on up the Cape Fear River is we're going to eventually get to fresh water. But between those two things, there's a mix of waters, slightly brackish. And what we end up with in looking at that is a difference in ecosystems, those associated with salt water versus those that are associated with fresh water. And in fact, one of the big things that we have, you're going to hear a lot today, important information about water quality. And UNCW has been doing since the 1990s looking at water quality in the lower Cape Fear. And in fact, Mike Mallon and others have done tons of work in looking at this. Each one of these is a station that's monitored monthly for looking at water quality. And in looking at those, you can see some of the things with the different areas. You'll hear about dissolved oxygen and fecal coliforms and all the PFAS, nitrates, phosphates that are in here. That's not going to be my goal, although I could talk about that today as well. I want to talk a minute about salinity. That NAV stands for Navassa. And as you go on down toward the mouth of the river, you can see that each one of those is a different station, and the salinity levels are actually increasing as you go downstream. Makes sense, right? But that's a very important thing to have. And in fact, what we see here, if we looked at the communities along that river, we will see that we have smooth cordgrass. This is Spartina alterniflora, which is now called Spirobolus alterniflorus. Salt marshes behind Bald Head Island. There's Old Baldy. Then we can have big cordgrass as we get more brackish and fresh. The invasive species Phragmites australis. And here's a picture along the Battleship Road where you've got cattails, Phragmites, ghost forest, and hardwoods in the background. Because once we eventually get all the way up to here, that's where we're going to have these swamp forests that include cypress, tupelo, and many other mixed species with high biodiversity. And if we look at this in a little bit different fashion, Kemp mentioned to you about sea level, and Deb did too. One of the things that's been a study that was done by Magdalene and Halls in 2020 has showed the change that we're seeing along some of these waterways. In fact, that's Town Creek, which is located right here. There's Smith Creek that Kemp mentioned as well. What you're seeing here is changing colors. What that's showing is that we have emergent wetlands that are migrating up the river. And that's because we're having rising water as well as changing salt. And so those are controlling the distribution of the kinds of species that we have in these areas. These emergent wetlands are changing as we're speaking. And one of the things with port deepening, that provides you a better conduit, less frictional drag for the waters to move up the river and increase that salinity that we have. So all of these are different species that we have, and one of the things that we consider in the sciences is ecosystem services. Ecosystem services are the value of that ecosystem. And the way we like to think about it, as the UN said, benefits people in many, many ways. And so they call it provisioning services, regulating services, supporting services, and cultural. Well, what I want to do is show you a few things of the Cape Fear. And a few things of the Cape Fear, we have critical riverine habitat, nursery grounds. We have important commercial and recreational fisheries, destination sites for recreation, such as birding. Rich historic cultural activity. We know fantastic rice culture, naval stores, and the maritime history of Wilmington. Water, as I say down here, defines us and built Wilmington. And one of the things I wanted to highlight too, lots of people are working on these. The blueprint, the Lower Cape Fear River Blueprint, was put together by the Coastal Federation in 2018, highlighting some of the opportunities that we have for restoring the ecosystems, restoring the oysters. Bill in the legislature just went on discussing improving the oyster that we have. $27 million associated with this, a goal of $100 million for our oysters in North Carolina. So very important to us. So one of the things that I would mention too is, I'm not going to talk today about one of those things, the storage of carbon, but that's a big issue. Marsh grasses are as rich in storage and productivity as any rainforest in the world. And it's not just providing food and forage for our shellfish and finfish, it's storing carbon. And our bottomland hardwoods are doing the same thing. Preservation of those areas is critical. This is a picture from some work. We have the Eagles Island Task Force that we've been trying to look at preserving some of our areas, our natural areas. And a couple of these are pictures from that. This is critical habitat going from the water all the way to the higher areas. And this picture down in the lower left for you guys, that's showing you some biodiversity that we have, all the way from the water back into the land areas too. And of course, Eagles Island has all that biodiversity in it. There's the state ports back there. This is, Leland area, Navassa over on this side, and there's, of course, the Brunswick River. And one of the important things about all of these different habitats is right there at the edge. It's a valuable site for primary nursery ground. And if you go down to the lower Cape Fear, what you can see here is the red is primary nursery grounds, blue is secondary nursery grounds. This red is initial post-larval development. This is where we live and breed and do all kinds of good stuff. This is critical area to maintain. And if you go right on up the Cape Fear River to Eagles Island, here's Wilmington, the Northeast and the Cape Fear River, you're going to hear a lot about fish in the next talk with Dawn. And one of the things that you have with this is these nursery grounds are so critical to everything that we do. And anything that you're doing to impact those should be considered very much before anything is done because of their value to recreational and commercial species. These are just some of them. I don't want to steal any of Don's thunder, but highlight all of these have been found in the lower Cape Fear. All of these are anadromous fish species. We've even got the Catadromous American eel. These go upstream to spawn. This guy goes downstream to spawn. But we also got many other species in the river. And I'll just leave it at that with one more comment. If we look at this area, one of the things that we have right here in the Northeast and the Cape Fear, Brunswick River, number one here is the tagging with our endangered species, the Atlantic sturgeon, so that we can monitor their health and migration patterns. This is a big deal that you're going to hear about next. John Owens, former member of the Cape Fear River Watch Board, caught a striped bass here. Of course, we are catch and release in the Cape Fear River. Cape Fear River Watch is trying to return the striped bass to its former glory. And one of the things we hope to do is start up again our Striper Fest tournament. That's a very big thing for us. It's a goal that we have. Unfortunately, with COVID, there's been issues, but we really want to start this again because of its value to us. So these areas are important upstream, but we also have important things downstream. These important birding areas and biodiversity areas, such as these down in the lower Cape Fear, are critical habitats. Also, they are fantastic birding sites. Audubon has done a lot of work, along with Lindsay doing her work down here, all the way from Pelican Island, Ferry Slip, all the way down to Battery. And of course, one of the things that we see in those Ferry Slip Island, here's a picture with royal terns and oyster catchers. On Pelican Island, what else? Pelicans, right? So pelicans we got here. And let me just tell you a brief thing. When I was growing up here, I didn't see brown pelicans. They were not around. This has been a true success story. Never underestimate how protection and rules that conserve things can really make a difference. That's also been true for our sea turtles in the past few years. Sea turtles have been having large and even record numbers in the past few years. But they started this in the 1990s. This was not started yesterday because it takes 25 to 30 years for that sea turtle to do its thing and come back to nest. So we need to know and protect these things to think about the future when we're taking any kind of action. And one of those actions is looking at sea level. In fact, one of the things that was listed in the paper was about it's not just the dredge-spoil islands, sea level rise can impact these as well. So what else do we have as far as ecosystem services? Well, one of those ideas is looking at cultural, historical, important areas. And this is something, this map over on the left, I know you can't see them, but there's 65 different plantation sites on this 1700s map up and down the Cape Fear River. And over on the right-hand side, this one shows you rice plantations that are south of, on, and north of Eagles Island. So this part of the Gullah Geechee corridor story, if you will, goes all the way from Florida to Brunswick County and New Hanover County here. And one of the things that's going on right now is to try to expand that for education to preserve our cultural history here in this area. And I just highlight the Carolina gold rice. They're still growing a little bit down in South Carolina. This was the historical important rice for our Gullah Geechee story. And one of the things that Brayton Willis and many others are working on right now is looking at expanding this driver, as I call it, an economic driver for Eagles Island, Uvasa, Leland, Belleville, all the way down to Southport, is to have this trail, if you will, or corridor for highlighting the cultural history of our area, including the naval stores. Very important. It's not just history either. This is an economic driver. We really need to protect these areas and understand their value. One of those sites is Orton Plantation, of course, down here in the lower part on the lower left. And by the way, you can't see it too well on this image, but those are rice canals shown in those little yellow arrows. And as I like to tell people, anytime you see a straight line in nature, it is human. So all of these straight lines are the rice canals that we have there. They're still preserved. Some of them are going away as we're having rising tides and stuff, though. And of course, our maritime history, hey, water built Wilmington. It built Southport. And in this area, Wilmington and Lower Cape Fear still relies on water and has a rich maritime history. Lawrence, back in the 1980s, did underwater archaeological sites. All of those are shipwrecks over on the Eagles Island side of the river. There's the battleship. And of course, Eagles Island was the Berry shipyard. That's where they built the North Carolina ironclad. We need to know about these things. These are really important to us. It's not just history, it's our culture. And it's also valuable ecotourism if you take advantage of it correctly. So all of those areas that are so important to us. Kemp mentioned about dredging. Well, this is the dredging history of the Port of Wilmington. 1871, the Cape Fear was only 12 feet deep. Today it's 42 with a goal of deepening it to 47 and 49 at the mouth of the river. And so Wilmington's maritime history includes the naval stores capital. By the way, these are all naval stores barrels over on the side of the river of Eagles Island. That's Wilmington in the background, and that's the ferry coming across. This area is really important. By the way, those of you who want to read, in 1898, they talk about the naval stores over on Eagles Island because they didn't want them in Wilmington. It was smelly, and it also could blow up. So it was put over on this side of the river. Very important, though. Wilmington, naval stores capital of the entire world. And so what you can see with this deepening is to accommodate bigger ships, like the Liberty ships that were built in Wilmington in the 1940s for the war, bringing in the USS North Carolina in 1961. So this is kind of the history, and again, this is one of those things that we could talk for hours and hours about. It's really interesting, going all the way from the 1800s up to today with 1,200-foot-long vessels coming in with all of these cargoes. And those are called TEUs. These are 20-foot cargo things. They can carry thousands of them, okay? So one of the things that you look at, we're trying to accommodate these newer Panamax ships in there, like that one that's 1,200 feet long. And to be able to have those, you have that wider turning basin. Of course, this leads to a few issues. I just highlight here, too, one of the things that you can see. This is before the area was dredged for the battleship North Carolina. That's where it now sits as it's turning in here and wrecked the Fergus Ark back there. And so one of the things that you see here, lots of trees. What's there now? It's ghost forest. We've had a changing water and salinity in this area. And in fact, the port is one of the big things for us. It's a big driver in North Carolina. This port deepening is going to be $880 million. Just the dredging itself is over $550 million and $150 million of mitigation. So this is really big. And you might notice you dredge all the way out into the ocean to allow those ships to come in here. Now that's going to require deepening but also widening of that ocean or the river as well. Now when you do that, you need to consider what's going on. Some of the things that's going to happen, as I said, reducing that frictional drag when you deepen that river, you allow the water to move in and out more easily. So that's going to lead to a tidal range of a little bit more, possibility of storm surge a little bit more, also higher salinity. At the surface, it's going to be over 1 part per thousand more when you deepen this. At the bottom, though, it's going to be like 5 parts per thousand more. So these are going to be some of those drivers that can change that vegetation. And down here on the bottom, it mentions vegetation changes with salinity, as you can see. 242 acres of tidal swamp area, 62 acres of cattail-dominated marsh, primary nursery ground effects. What we should be doing and considering is considering cumulative impacts. That's the bottom line. It's not saying no, it's saying consider all the things that will happen whenever we're doing work in the river or along the river itself. So that is just one of the activities or concerns. These are a bunch of them. I don't have time to go into all those, but I would like to show you a couple of these, in particular sea level and high tide, and a couple of those other ones, if I may. So there was a reason Wilmington was built where it was. This is an elevation map. Red means high. Blue means low. So there's Eagles Island, 1 to 3 feet of elevation mostly. Devassa, Leland, Belleville, 20 to 30 feet of elevation. Wilmington, upwards of 50 feet. The highest point in Wilmington is about 62 feet. But there's a reason people built here. They didn't want to be down there with the mosquitoes and in the muck. Nobody built the Bellamy Plantation on Eagles Island, okay? So you built over here. And so some of the areas like Point Peter, there's the battleship, and this area might be considered for, a hotel and spa. But what's going on in this area? Sea level's been rising. People see it's a linear rise. Well, that's kind of what it was, but look at this. It's accelerating. We know it's accelerating. We have a gauge right downtown, right over there underneath the Memorial Bridge that tells us exactly what's going on in the river. And so it seems rising. If we had a mitigation strategy, 1 foot of rise by the end of the century, we'd still lose 770 square miles of land in North Carolina. If we raise 3 feet, we're going to lose 1,500 square miles of land in North Carolina. It's a done deal. And in fact, it could be even more than that with rising sea levels or with subsidence, as we see in some of these areas. We need to know and plan for what's going on. So what I want to show you very quickly is then, this is what we have now with mean highest high water, which is the average of our high water events. And what I'm going to show you is this is a 1 foot rise, a 2 foot rise, and a 3 foot rise of sea level. It gets bluer, doesn't it? Well, this is what NOAA says will happen. This is what they came out with in February of just this year. This is the projections of an intermediate stage. By 2060 to 2080, we're going to have a 2 foot rise in sea level. That. You know what that looks like? It looks like that. This is Battleship Road. I took this picture. That car stalled out. It flooded out on that road. This was on January 3rd of this year. That truck had to tow him out. This is Point Harbor Road. I'm just telling you, we need to make sure and take care and understand risk. So there in blue is what we will have every day. This occurred on January 3rd of this year. This is what we'll have every day in 2060 to 2070. So what is this? This is associated with high tide flooding. And in fact, January 3rd was that. It was now the 10th highest high flood event in Wilmington's history. 2.35 feet above mean highest high water. It's right there. The highest one, though, is Isaias in 2020, that little storm that was off the coast that led to some issues. Double that, we had a 4.3 foot rise in high tide flooding at that time. We also had Florence, Matthew. All of these except Hurricane Hazel have all occurred since the 1990s. Many of them in just the last few years. So it's very important to take a look at these things. So what's happening? It's not just one day either. This is one from 2020, just showing you 7 days of high tide flooding associated with these, what we call perigeo events. The moon is closer to the earth. You combine new or full moon with closeness of the moon to the earth, you get very high tides, okay? And so in looking at those things, what we see is that we can have, swimming geese in the parking lot and egrets fishing on the roadway. That has happened. This was this year. So what's going on with high tide flooding? Look at the change that's occurring. And look at the last 10 years. Again, we need to plan. So for those who doubt this, I very encourage you to go out June 14th and July 15th. That's when full moon and perigee will occur simultaneously. I promise you, I'll bet you your favorite drink that you will have water on the road and have water that you should not drive into at that time. So what's going on? Climate risk and assessment, as was mentioned. 2020, sea level will continue to rise, virtually certain, very likely with storm events. So NOAA just came out with their forecast, higher than normal. That's my public service message for today. And this is what you see. It's more rain because we have warmer waters and warmer air that hold more moisture. But it's not just the moisture. Our hurricanes are slowing down. The slower they move, the more rain they contain, more flooding you get. So following Hurricane Florence, the Zurich report came out, and this is an insurance group. They said, we need to critically assess where we build and how we incentivize risk. Weather events are changing. The climate has visibly changed. And I say, can you say compound flooding? Because that's what we have here in Wilmington with storm surge, rainfall, and upstream flooding, all occurring right here. We just need to understand the risk, and we don't need to be incentivizing risk in these low areas. So there's a couple of areas. I don't have time, and I'm not here to talk about development today, but we can consider all of these low-lying areas, and we should consider what is going to occur there before we do anything else. So the Army Corps is considering it. They've been on Eagles Island for 100 years. Frequency and severity of flooding are both increasing. These guys are thinking about getting off of Eagles Island. So what should we be doing? Well, the battleship is doing something. The battleship in Living with Water, this is what it looks like. And Don York has been working Moffett Nichols with the battleship and Terry Bragg, Captain Bragg, all in this area to do something. And one of the things that they're looking at to live with shoreline is creating shorelines, natural areas and wetlands, and raising this area. The battleship is a true treasure to us. We need to protect everything about it. It's a memorial to our veterans. It's a memorial for North Carolina. It's also an tourism site as well. We should do everything we can to protect it. So what do I recommend? People always say, what do you recommend? You know, you have all these issues, what do you recommend? Well, I have a recommendation. The recommendation is that you use these areas for the right purpose. And the right purpose for something like that is a raised area that's small, that's low impact, that's not too large. And what we end up with is things that highlight our maritime history, our rice culture, our naval stores. It's a destination site. We understand what the risks are. We plan accordingly to protect these areas. So what I want to end up with is say, celebrate the Cape Fear. It's something valuable to us. We really need to protect it, understand it, and know exactly what's going on. And the guys that are going to follow me are going to do a fantastic job of showing you some of the issues that we have and why we should be looking at this. Thank you very much.